and welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jordan Kennedy. Jordan studied finance and investment banking at Wisconsin School of Business and then started his career as a financial consultant at a financial services company and then as an investment associate at a family office. He then jumped into the tech world, getting into business development and revenue leadership for companies like Wunderkind, Sawyer, and Botify, until starting his most recent and current venture, where he serves today as the co-founder and CEO of Jump. After experiencing firsthand what it's like to scale teams through the growth at all costs model, Jordan and his co-founders are taking a different approach to building Jump, so I'm particularly excited to get his thoughts and find out how they plan to break the status quo. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave us a comment if you have questions or feedback. If you're joining us from Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please drop us a review and let us know what you think of the episode. This stuff really helps to grow the audience. Without further ado, let's dive in. Jordan, thanks for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Colin. Happy to be here.
Likewise, your name got mentioned on the last episode with Adam Liebman, who was my first VP of sales. And I think we were talking about growth at all costs, and he sort of brought up that you guys are doing things different. So I immediately wanted to reach out. As a baseline, we're going to get into that in the second question. I've got 7 questions lined up here. As a baseline, I like to start with everyone here on this question. And for anyone who's just tuning in for the first time, I've been asking a series of the same questions to sales leaders over the past, it's been about 15 or almost 20 episodes. I'm really trying to get people's thoughts on some hot topics and debates that I've been, involved in on LinkedIn and with friends. And I think the big one, if you look back kind of at 2024, like what's sort of been like this hot debate topic that's been thrown around a lot of it comes back to sort of the broken outbound model. And then from there, it gets into different things like growth at all cost, average tenure, quota attainment, all that stuff we'll touch on. But let's start with this one. What do you think is broken with B2B outbound, and how did we get here?
Great question. I don't think you could ignore this topic if you logged on to LinkedIn at all last year. Yeah. It's specifically around like cold calling. I think there's like a group of people who like are so adamant about cold calling and that it works, and then a group that are like so adamant that like you have to evolve from it. I think taking a step back in terms of like how did we get here? To me, it seems like pretty obvious in that we made it so easy to just degrade the channels that we used to reach out to people, whether it was like emailing or calling, right? It's like with the rise, I remember when I first bought Outreach, I don't know, was that like 2017, 2018? They had been around for a little bit, but like, I feel like that's when that, sales automation tooling started to explode and made it so easy to start sending hundreds of emails, right? Same thing with calling. Instead of with dialers, you can now call people, hundreds of people like over the course of an hour, right? So it was very easy, I think, like why it happened. And we just made it easy for people to do that. And it worked for a bit. So it was like, great. Like we had these playbooks where it was like, call this many people, email this many people, and we're going to get these types of results. Then everyone leaned in, right? And so it was pretty easy of like why we got there. And I think it's pretty interesting if you actually take a step back there to look at the state of things. And obviously a lot of people are talking about it right now, but I think what people need to see is like, I think it kind of depends on who you sell to is in terms of like what you need to be doing from an outbounding perspective. So like, for instance, you mentioned Adam, who was on, he kind of talked a little bit about his outbounding process, and they sell to like lawyers. And there's like people who actually like pick up the phone. And so like cold calling like makes sense in that type of scenario where like for the past like 10 years in my previous 2 jobs, we were selling to marketers and selling to CMOs. Very rarely were you ever getting a CMO on a cold call, right? So like, so much of it, I think, depends on who you're selling to, like what your motion is and like what you need to lean into. But like clearly what we have been doing is not going to work where you can just like spam people via email, via phone. I used to cold call when I was at the family office, like back in the day to try and find companies to like invest in. And like that actually worked back then when you were like able to like, people weren't getting hundreds of cold calls in a given week. Like I get probably like 10 a day. I'm never picking any of them up anymore just because it's like, it's just kind of gotten to a place where it's just out of control. So
are you on do not disturb all day with your phone?
I'm not always. Part of it is just like having kids.
You can't be. Yeah,
I can't be. But I like very rarely am I ever picking up a cold call. And it's funny because I think there's certain people who are like, when you're running a sales org, you should be picking up cold calls because like you want to like teach your team. And I get that to a fault, but it's like at the same time I don't have enough time to be doing that.
It's a time thing. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I think it's just like it's obvious why we got here. It's still easy. And the thing that baffles me though is like people are continuing to do it. Like that's what baffles me is like people are still sending these emails. They're still cold calling. And like I think it'd be fairly obvious. Like when I was at Botify and I could have been a buyer of sales tech, like I think there would be easy ways to like reach out to me and get my attention. And most people were not doing it. Most people were just like doing like the generic emails, like through automation or doing the generic cold calls. Like people are just not putting in the effort because it's still so easy. And their leaders are telling them like, this is what you have to do. Like make these calls, make these many calls, send these many emails. So that to me is what's baffling right now is like people are not taking that extra step to like go and try and get connected to the people they need to. They're still hitting like the easy button.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on all those points. I was writing down each note, and it's just like boom, boom, boom. Like you're hitting on what's interesting, or maybe not interesting. Maybe it's predictable, but what's now proven after listening to all of the interviews through this podcast, like we're all basically saying the same things. Some people view it a little bit different, and there's certain angles that maybe were more impactful to other people. But seems like we all generally agree, right? And what I think might be sort of interesting about this that kind of clicked in my head thinking about this as we're going through it is like sales teams generally have always been sort of a team of copycats. We like to look at what works elsewhere and then just sort of repeat it. And that makes sense, right? I mean, it's you find what works and you repeat it. And I wonder how much like social media has exacerbated that because now we have, sales influencers where we're literally telling people what we're doing, like in fine detail. And that almost probably makes it worse. And so when you take the sales automation tools and the social media sort of oversharing of trade secrets, so to speak, it's like the second you find something that works, it's like out there in the open, everyone's using it. And if you're not telling people you're using it, like Outreach is figuring it out through their data and they're publishing it probably somehow. And so I think there's a lot of that too. And that ties into also sort of just the venture capital world of like finding a model that works and then repeating it. And you see the founders and the CEOs talk about this stuff on LinkedIn all the time. And, it's pretty clear that they get pressure to go in a very specific direction, right? T2, D3 growth, segmented roles by outbound prospecting and closing deals and customer success. And it's like everyone gets pushed down this sort of cookie cutter mold. And the reason for that is if there's 20 companies doing it, probably two of them will become a unicorn. But the problem is companies are not cookie cutter, right? And I think what we're starting to realize is there are other ways that you can do these things. And there's companies today that are paving trails, doing things in a new way. I know Rome, who I had Howard Lerman on here, talked about doing things a new way. I know you guys are doing things a new way, which we're going to dive into. But before we do that, let's get your thoughts on sort of the status quo, right? The growth at all cost mindset or model that has been, plaguing the industry. And I say plaguing, it's not inherently bad. It works, right? There are companies that become tremendous unicorns. There are people who become very wealthy, and there's lots of great products and all that sort of stuff. There's also tons of downside. When the odds are that 1 or 2 out of 20 are going to make it, that means that it's less than a 50-50 chance that you're going to make it. And so like all this stuff sort of starts to play a role. And I think we are I want to say that sort of the pandemic maybe helped push us to a different realm a little bit because it changed the finance world, right? Money dried up a bit. People started working remote and they got pushed into, out of the offices, and that sort of normalized, doing business over Zoom, even in the enterprise and whatnot. So it sort of opened the doors to thinking a little bit differently. And also you had the investors that were starting to say like, hey, we need to see some profit, right? We're not going to be just going with these crazy valuations and whatnot. Like, let's get efficient here. And so that has allowed people to start thinking differently. So we're going to dive into what you guys are doing, when we get towards the last question there, where we jump into no pun intended. But I want to get your thoughts first to build the baseline. What are your thoughts on that growth at all cost model? What has been your experience there? The good, the bad, the ugly, wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah. So like the first time I really felt it was at BalanceX, which is now Wunderkind. It was like 2017, 2018. And we had just grown from like 30 to almost 60 million in 1 year. Like
that was your first like tech job, right?
That was the first tech job. It was like the first tech job. I like 6 to 12 months and I started building out one of the sales teams there. We went from like 10 to 100 in 4 years. Like incredible run. So many things went wrong though for a variety of different reasons. And Wunderkind's still around doing well. But we went from the third, like 30 to 60, I think, in 1 year. And we had just raised like our big round kind of like on the heels of that. And all of a sudden, like the plan was to get from like 60 to 95. And like the first thing I asked myself was like, how are we going to do this? And this was like the first time I was a sales leader. And so like I probably didn't have enough like salt to really even know what I was doing to like really push back on it. But the moment that I knew something was wrong was at like the end of Q1, I was 67% to my goal. And of the four sales teams, I was the highest attainment of all the sales teams. And all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, like what's going on here? Like we just like incredibly screwed up and like we're already like behind on the year. And I like sat down with my CFO and I was like, the year's already gone. Like we're not going to hit this number because like here's Q1 and here's Q2. And like it was because the plan was to get from like 60 to 95, but it was all based on like pretty much a fallacy. It was like, let's just add more people, right? And like that's going to help us get there. And I think we ended up going from like 60 to maybe like 75 that year. So like for all intents and purposes, like pretty good year. But like what happened because of that was like you hired a bunch of people who you then had to like let go of people. You had people who weren't hitting numbers, people who were not hitting bonuses. The culture started to erode. So it was like you saw what happened because of the decision that was made was like we raised this round. And now all of a sudden we had to put like, fuel in the fire and try to get to, hit that escape velocity. And like, to your point, it's like, we were a portfolio company and like the VCs wanted us to be able to see like, can we be that one where if we add those more people, can we keep growing 50, 60% at the scale that we're at? And the reality was like, we couldn't. We probably didn't have the market to justify those numbers. We didn't have the pipeline to justify those numbers. And I think the problem is like, it was a really good company. Still is, right? But it's like you could have run the business a very different way and probably had a much better outcome for so many people involved if you just didn't go with the growth at all costs method. It was just like, what's the right decision for the business, right? Like that's
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest problem that I look at like the growth at all costs era was like that was the question that was probably never asked is like what's best for the business. It was always like can you hit this growth rate, which was more for like the VC
It's
than
about the investors. It's what's best for the investors. Yeah.
oh, it's totally right. And so that was like my first foray into it. And then I went to Sawyer and within like 4 or 5 months, it was kind of a little bit of there's a variety of reasons why I only stayed for a few months.
Can I ask you a question on Wunderkind first? Did they, because you said you mentioned they're going from, what was it, 60,000 to 95,000?
60 million to 95 million.
Oh, okay. So you were way further in the scale. Okay. So, but
It went from 30 million to 60 million in almost 1 year. And then
wow.
yeah, it was incredible. And like I look back at that era and I was like, that was the year, like it's like he should have exited. Like there were so many things we should have done differently then.
Yeah.
So it was growing fast, but it was because we significantly changed our sales motion and we like 10x our ACVs pretty much overnight.
Okay.
So it allowed us to like hit this like velocity. But what we didn't realize is like we didn't have the market to continue to go and get like these 7-figure deals and be
Right.
able to like continue to do it like over and over and over again. And then the other thing that I think happens in this model is you get greedy and you have to like hit these growth rates. So you increase your ACVs because you have to like grow into these growth, like you have to have these growth rates or
Yeah.
grow into your valuation. So like your SaaS prices go up and like the value may not be there for the customer anymore. So then that like all of a sudden like happens, like you have churn. And we saw that at Wunderkind, like 18 months later, all of a sudden we had like
Hmm.
70% renewal rate. Like it was like exactly the playbook you would think of like what would happen at a company that like couldn't make it in this model. So
Did
yeah.
you have competition coming in too that, each year it's kind of new competitors?
Yeah, we definitely did. And like we were definitely ahead. Like I think we were like we were like first to market of what we were doing. And then you have like cheaper competition come in, right? It gets crowded, and then it's all of a sudden it's harder to like keep your high price point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was definitely you would think would happen.
When
Yeah.
you're messing around with big numbers like that, that makes even more sense. So what it sounds like is they were going for T2, D3 growth rates, which for those who don't know means you're gonna triple your revenue for 2 years, and then you're gonna double it for 3 years. And this is like very much like cookie cutter VC stuff. When they put money in the company, that's basically what they want to see. And the reason for that is because if you hit those metrics, they can raise the valuation of the company, they can sell a bunch of their shares and make a bunch of profit on their investment. And so that's why they're going to push every company in that direction, whether or not it even makes sense for that company. And the way I like to sort of explain this to salespeople is sometimes, I don't know if you know that, like if you've experienced this or seen this or heard about this, but there are companies out there, not really in SaaS. I mean, maybe there are some, but they're old, sort of more legacy, maybe advertising and agency and some of those multi-level marketing companies. The way that they would often hire salespeople back in the day is they would hire very large groups, and it would basically be like a test, and they would just see for 30 days like who works out, and they would fire like 90% of the group, and they would end up with the best of that group. And this used to be a very popular hiring strategy. It probably does work. It probably does help you get like the best of the group, but it's also really savage and you're wasting a lot of people's time and all that sort of stuff. But I like to use that example because that's exactly what the VCs are doing to the 20 companies they invest in, right? Is they're bringing all of them on board. They're saying you have to follow this growth model. You have to sort of hire these teams, do this, that, and the other thing. And we're just going to sort of shake it out and see which ones it works out for.
Totally right. I mean, it's exactly what I mean. That's what the game is, right? It's like they need one out of their 20 portfolio companies to have the $1 billion plus exit. And so it's like, let's just try and like bend the company as much as we can and see which one doesn't break.
Yeah. And go ahead. Yeah. I mean, it from an investment standpoint, it works. It makes sense. Like I see these guys with their Patagonia vests on. I'm like, you know what you're doing, right? But it doesn't make sense for everyone involved. And when you're talking about hiring hundreds of people and, maybe 18 or 19 of those 20 companies are going to fail, this is thousands of people, right, who are getting turned over every single year or every other year or whatnot in their jobs in this industry. And I think it's a major problem personally. I don't really know what the solution is. I think the solutions that I get come to mind, I also like immediately don't like because I think of unionizing. I think of things like this, but it's like, those also get manipulated. Those also get abused and turned into corruption and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, you see all the Amazon strikes and stuff going on now, and you read between the lines and you're like, are they getting manipulated? Like they're going on strike demanding more money at the same time that, they're building robots that could replace their jobs. It's like, are they actually backing themselves into a corner just so that Amazon could be like, you know what? Like you guys pushed us too far and now we're just going to pull in these robots and like, and this stuff happens with unions. They actually will manipulate the union because then all you need to do is manipulate the leader of the pact and it will trickle down to the whole group. And so it becomes dangerous even when you try to solve the problems that way.
Totally. Yeah. And I think the other thing that's unfortunate is people have amnesia. And so like at some point, we're probably going to get back to an era where
yes.
At all costs. And like it would be the same thing that happens to people over and over again. So.
Yes, I do think we'll head back there. That's actually, let me get your thoughts on that before we move on to the next question, because that's a big part of how I've framed this question. What I'm seeing today is that it's a divergence. It's sort of like we're picking a strategy. Are we going to, go the traditional VC route and, just raise money and we're going to, make it or break it, T2, D3 kind of style? Or we're going to try something new? Are we going to maybe bootstrap? Are we going to maybe raise a little bit of money? Or maybe we have really good sort of clout with investors and we're going to raise big money, but we're going to tell them we're doing things different. And I think that's like sort of what Howard Lerman's doing with Rome. And like, you probably need to be a multiple time successful founder to like be able to kind of take that type of risk. But what do you think there? So it sounds like you're saying you think it'll come back, or do you think it'll fully come back, or do you think we're going to stay in this? There's like two worlds now.
No, I do think that, myself included, there are people who are jaded by what they've seen and felt and experienced. And there's going to be a whole, I think, generation of founders who are like, there's a different way to do things. And myself being one of them, my co-founders, and we can get into a bit, but like, I do think there is going to be this generation of people who went through like the ZERB era and the growth at all costs era and be like, there's a different way to build a company. And it may not be that you're going to become like a $10 billion business, but you could have a very successful business that's great for you, great for your customers. And so I do think we're going to go and see people do that. But there's still plenty of money out there, and there's still going to be plenty of people who want to raise a ton of money. And I think there will be this divergent. I do think we will see like, a handful of people take on that type of VC money and have that grow at all cost mentality. And we'll move away from this like more profitability mindset at some point. I think like we'll still like feel that, but you think back to like the financial crisis and like everything that went wrong there. And then you look at like things that are happening, 10, 15 years down the road. And it's like, again, people kind of forget what happened. So, but I do think there's people who are rooted in what they went through. And like, those will be the people who will like take that different path. So.
Bingo. Yeah, it's scar tissue. It's being a bit jaded. Yeah, I'm totally with you. Let's get your thoughts on AI here. What do you think's going on with AI? This is another hot debate, like our SDRs, getting replaced by robots, all that sort of stuff. I tend to fall in the camp of, probably in some cases they're getting replaced. In other cases, it's a tool that will supplement people and make them more efficient. But what do you think's going on there with AI in sales over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, and I for one will be like, who I have no idea where we'll be in 10 years. Like, the technology, like, there's probably very few people who like on the planet who could really like articulate where they're going to be, like, unless they're so deep in that technology. But I fundamentally believe in some place, like, a human still needs to be involved in some capacity, depending on the sale, especially like in a larger enterprise sale. Like, for decades, humans want to deal with humans, and so there's no like full replacement. But I do firmly believe we will have like leaner teams in either you could have a manager managing more people because they're gonna have the ability to like access information in a better way through AI, or you're just gonna be able to have a leaner team and do things more efficiently generally. So like where you might have needed like a 50-person go-to-market org with 30 BDRs and 30 sellers, maybe you can do the same job with 5 to 10 BDRs and sellers. Like I feel like that to me feels like where we are headed is just like way more like being way more efficient. But I don't think like we are replacing BDRs except maybe in like very specific industries. I have a friend and a former Bounce Xer Wunderkinder who started his own company, and they are think like large staffing agencies when you might be looking for like a contract person. Like they're basically like having an AI bot like interview someone for like the phone screens, right? And so like they're essentially like replacing the need for like recruiters. But
Yeah.
it's not like the type of person you'd go and hire, type of person I'd go and hire, right? It's a very specific type of industry. So there like could be like edge cases like that where maybe in like those types of industries, like you see a replacement of people, but like I don't know, I'm very much in the camp, especially like in the enterprise world. Like I still think humans like have to be involved in some capacity, at least for now. And I don't think that changes for the next 5 years, maybe in 10 years from now, but like I don't know. I just think people want to deal with humans. Like I want to deal with a human unless it's like a super simple sale. But like if I was going to be buying, something that was going to cost me $500,000, $100,000, whatever it is, like I probably want to deal with a person just for the sense of wanting to deal with it. So
I'm with you. I completely agree. I think it's two things. I think it's case by case. There's scenarios where, self-serve and PLG can work really well. And, companies have a relatively easy product to explain. Maybe they don't need a lot of, details and whatnot. There's also like developer products where developers would probably rather read like some white paper than talk to a salesperson. And so in cases like that, they tend to be more self-serve and stuff. And then you have salespeople that are there to sort of assist as needed. So I think there's that element too. So obviously none of this is the same for every company, right? Like it's different for all. But the one thing that I don't hear a lot of people bring up, I'm curious to get your thoughts. I think also part of this is generational. And I think that a lot of it is what we're used to doing, right? And it ties into like, people are like, do you like having cameras all over your car looking at you? Do you like having your Alexa recording you? And, generations that are older are less comfortable with that. Whereas I look at my nieces and they've just had this stuff since birth. They're
yeah.
not uncomfortable. There's not an inkling of discomfort. I watch them on their iPads, group chatting with all their friends, and like they're laying there in their pajamas. They don't care what angle the camera's at, and like they don't care. And it's because they've been conditioned differently since birth. And so I think that as they become the buyers of products, that will change the way that certain people buy things. They may be more comfortable, doing a self sign up or talking to an AI to get questions answered. They might have social anxieties that we don't have. So I do think that there's an element of that. We're not quite at the stage of selling to Gen Z yet. So, it may not really ever affect us, but I do think that's something to also be prepared for, at least. And one other thing I wanted to throw in there too, just for the audience, this more ties into our last question, but, as we start to see this sort of divergence of sort of different approaches to growing companies, whether it's raising a ton of money or, being, I don't even want to say bootstrap, maybe just being a bit more lean, or traditional is probably a better word for it, business traditional, right? Rather than just like what is more gambling of this craziness of just throwing money everywhere. And by the way, if we didn't live in an inflationary economy, none of this would be happening. There would be no building valuations through the roof of companies that don't even make sense. Like those numbers only happen because we keep printing money. So just for the record, like that's why that even exists. But something people should also just be aware of for maybe some of the sellers who are newer and maybe not as well versed in some of this stuff. When you hear people talking about their exits and they're like, we got acquired for $2 billion or whatever, on the surface, you look at that and you think how rich the founder got, but that's really not how the math works out, right? So you could start a company today without venture capital and you could retain a significant percentage of ownership of the company and you could sell it for $10 million or $100 million and you could become more wealthy than the guy who sold it for 10 billion or whatever, who barely owns any of the company. And so I know most people know that, but for folks who are maybe new to the industry or just getting out of school, I like to just put that out there so you understand when you see these announcements of how much someone raised or how much they're being acquired for, whatever, it really doesn't mean anything until you get beneath the surface and figure out like how much did you own of that company and all that sort of stuff.
Not to mention even just like the preference of capital that might be on that business, right? If you raised $1 billion, like, and you sold for 3 billion, you have a 2x pre, it's like there's so many nuances underneath.
Yes. Yes.
Totally understand.
Yeah. My first company that I worked for was Single Platform with Adam, and they got acquired for $100 million, which today sounds small, but they were on their Series A. They were not even doing $1 million in revenue yet, which is insane. It's just crazy. And so like, yeah, the founder, and he was only one founder. There were no official co-founder titles. He probably walked away. I estimate he walked away probably with like 30 million. Maybe I don't know. It could be on the high end, could be on the low end. But like, people could look at that and be like, oh, it's not even $1 billion acquisition. But like, he could have walked away with more money than some people get from those acquisitions.
And honestly, he sold his business. Like, I think like to sell your business and walk away with money is like immensely challenging that people like underappreciate. So
yeah, it sure is. Let's talk about quota attainment here. So, and this sort of goes across the board for obviously if it affects reps, it affects the VPs and the leaders as well. So, the industry average they say is below 40%. I've checked any resource I've checked that tracks this stuff, that's about where it's at. I tend to think it's probably a bit lower, and all of these numbers are actually usually worse than they are displayed as, and that's because not everyone reports their horrific numbers. What do you think's going on there? Does it tie into the growth at all cost model, or do you think it's more over hiring? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind it's tied to that. And so I'll think about when I was at Botify. This was right after we raised our last round. We raised at the end of 21, so like right in the prime, like right at the end of like the ZERP era. And the plan was to grow from like I think we had like 6 or 7 reps, maybe 8 reps, to like almost 20. It was like an insane amount of reps. I mean, it made like 23 reps. I forget. It was just like it was ludicrous to the point where like I kept fighting and fighting and fighting. And like we were in April, so like the year had already started. And we were in April at our like leadership, like a leadership offsite in France, because we were a French-based company. And like we finally came to a conclusion like of what we were going to do at that point in time. Because I just like I wouldn't do it. I wasn't going to hire all of these reps because it was like I knew exactly what would happen. Like we would hire all these people.
Were they full cycle reps?
They were not full cycle. So we had BDR team too. So there was like BDR hiring that like backed it. We were kind of like a 3-2 org, and then 1-1 at the strategic level. And
what was the pipeline plan? Like they say hire these people. Did they have a plan for pipeline for them?
Purely like it was like we were trying to almost 3x new bookings. So not growth, but like 3x new bookings. And it was all based on headcount. So there was no math behind it of like.
But they're not full cycle. So how are they even thinking they're going to have pipeline?
Well, adding in BDRs.
Okay. So it was hiring more AEs and BDRs.
But the biggest thing that was missing was like, is there enough accounts in the, like, do we have enough people to go and target to generate the amount of, like, it was just like the bottoms up wasn't there. And so I ended up like meeting them a little bit in the middle of like, all right, we're not going to hire 23 reps. We'll go to like 13 and then we'll reassess like halfway through the year or somewhere what it was. But what happened was exactly what I thought was going to happen was like most of the team didn't end up hitting quota. Like we had to let go people because it was just like we didn't have the pipeline to suffice. And so I do think it's so much tied to growth at all costs because it's like, again, people have these plans. The easiest thing to input into your spreadsheet is reps. Like that is literally the easiest math and the easiest thing that people can do. And it's like you have a lot of finance people who aren't close to the ground that really understand it. And they can even be like, well, we see all these accounts in there. Don't we have like 20,000 accounts in Salesforce? And it's like, no, sorry, we don't. We just haven't updated our ICP because like we have to get everyone's alignment because you need marketing, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I'm telling you, we only have like 4,000 accounts to go after. So I do think it's that growth at all costs. And I think it's really hard for people. I think it'd be really hard for people to go the other way and be like, let's keep like the same team and try to like focus more on efficiency and try and increase conversion rate. Like that seems, I think, scarier because it's like a tougher thing for people to like wrap their hands around where it's like, how can we get 15% more with like the same team almost or 20% more with the same team? And that feels scarier, I think, and it's harder. So I think the easiest thing that people do is overhire. And like that just, there's so much negativity that comes with overhiring. It's just like the culture erodes. Your best players like hate it because like now they're not getting as much pipeline and they can see it for themselves too. They're like, why are we doing this? Like, so I do think it's like somewhat directly related.
I tend to think it has. So you mentioned the fear part, like, is it a scarier thought to think, how do we grow more revenue without more people? I think that's part of it, but I actually think it's more that the investors want to have a compelling narrative, right? And maybe the fear actually it sort of intermingles with what you're saying there, but it's like if they're going to go pitch another round of capital, they need to have a compelling story that says, here's how we're going to grow, right? And it gets very technical when you start saying how you're going to get more efficient and how you're going to do all these, pull these little it's so much easier to just be like, we're going to hire more people, right? And I think it might be that simple that like that's kind of where it comes from. I think you're right on the sales leadership side. Like it is scarier to have the pressure of like you got to grow revenue without growing headcount. Also because like you're going to actually be forced to focus your energy on figuring out how to grow that revenue. Whereas when you're just hiring, let's be honest, like the majority of your effort is focused on hiring and you're sort of just hoping it works out revenue wise. Because you really can't do like a whole lot while you're hiring. Like you're not out there closing deals. You're interviewing, you're hiring, you're training people, and you're ramping them up. And it's like you can only put your energy in so many places at once. And so I do think that generally speaking, from the sales leadership angle, at least, we're generally just excited to hire more people. Like it's a pretty easy and fun job to do. At least I love doing it. I would, if you could give me two jobs, like, hey, come into this one and we're going to pay you, I don't know, $500K to hire 50 people, or come into this one and we're going to pay you $500K to figure out how to make 5 people hit this sales target. Like all things equal, I want to go hire people. Like for me, that's way more fun,
And like the motion of hiring is like, I don't want to say it's easy, right?
It is.
Yeah.
You're giving away money instead of taking it from people. You're right. Yeah. When you're hiring, I mean, that's why people say recruiting is a job, a sales job. I'm like, kind of. It's also like more of like a marketing job. Like you're getting paid to spend money, whereas salespeople have to bring the money in. These are very different things. One is way more enjoyable than the other, right? So yeah, there's a bit of that there. Let's talk about the average tenure. I mean, the VP sales leaders, it's about 18 months, a year and a half, maybe 2 years, whatever. Again, this is another one where I think that the numbers are probably worse than what is actually reflected in the data, because if you got fired in a really short amount of time, it's coming out of the data, it's coming off your LinkedIn. Right. So what do you think's going on there? I mean, I've said this 1,000 times ad nauseum, so I won't go into length on it. But my general take is that it ties into that whole narrative building. It ties into like we want to have the VP who's right for this stage of growth, which is the biggest, most bullshit statement ever. Because like everyone who did a stage of growth did it for the first time at one point in time. And like, usually that was their most successful time doing it. And so then they're like, oh, I want to have this guy. Cause it's like Adam crushed it at single platform. And like, then everyone will think that it can go do it at the next company. And it's not a knock on Adam. It's that so many stars have to align for that to happen, right? So many things have to be just right. And so, yeah, I tend to think this whole stage-based rotation of executives is tough. And it also obviously just comes back to quotas being astronomical, and someone has to, be blamed and stuff. But what do you think's going on there? What have you experienced in your
Yeah.
career?
So I tend to agree that I think especially for like certain stages, call it maybe it's like, I don't know, the 5 to 100 million stage, like actually trying to find that up and comer like person who's like punching up, who's just like, it's their first VP of sales job, or maybe it's like their first VP of sales job at like a $25 million company that's growing to 50. Like find that person who's just going to like run through walls because they haven't done it before and they want to prove themselves. Like
Yeah.
I find that person every day and all day. I think like maybe at some stage where it's like you're going through an IPO and it's more like there's like certain things like that. Like maybe you're looking for a certain profile, but I definitely would punch up. To me, so much of it is like the easiest place to point a finger when things aren't going well is sales, because it's like it's so black and white of like this is the goal and like you either hit it or you don't. And it's like given the growth at all costs era, and it's like where goals were so high, so many people weren't hitting their goals. And like the easiest place to point a finger is sales, even though there could be a variety of reasons, right? Why like the company's not doing well. Like it could be churn, it could be product, it could be 1,000 things, but I think the easiest
Yeah.
place to point is sales. And so I think
What's
that
interesting there too is like if they actually wanted to know why we weren't hitting numbers, the people who have the most accurate answer are the people they're blaming.
totally 100%.
That's what's so funny about the whole thing.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. So I think that's why you see such a short tenure. It's because it's like you're not performing, and it's like again, probably where you go with your board and your investors is like, who's to blame? And it's probably the sales manager. It's like let's find someone who knows how to hit these goals and can make it happen, even though they might not like uncover the layers to figure out like what's really happening. So I think like that's probably to me the number one reason why there's like such a short tenure, which is I think it's like. It's kind of bullshit because it's like it takes a while to like bring in your team like truly it's going to take you like six if anyone's being honest, it's going to take you 6 to 12 months to get like fully ramped into a position, if not
Yes.
longer, depending what
Yes.
you're like. And then so you should give that person like obviously you'll have a sense of like it's not working out, but like to cut someone after 18 months, if like things are going okay, but maybe not great, it's like it's still like relatively like early in, as long as it's not like an alarming red flag. Like you see people who like get cut after a year after hitting goals, and you're just like they were barely ramped at that point. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's just so easy to blame a sales leader, and that's why you see such a short tenure. So
Yeah. I think I'm 100% with you. I think it's the blame game. You need someone to blame, but they also need a new exciting narrative, which goes back to that like we're going to hire all these people. We got this new person coming in, and I've seen it in every board presentation that I've ever reviewed or sat in on. There's always a few slides where they're showing the new executive that they're excited about bringing in, and that is part of the hype narrative. That is part of the how we're going to do this. Because when they try to dig into the details of like how you're actually going to do things, like I said, it's very hard to answer those questions unless you have a very robust plan. And you kind of don't want to get into those details with investors. They start poking holes in things and whatnot. So you want to keep it high level. It's really easy to just be like, look at this person's resume. Look at all that they've done. We're bringing them in.
they
You
broke
know?
50 to 100 before,
Yeah,
like.
they did it before with a totally different product, right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly right. So, and it's funny. I think the people that I know who have been in like sales leadership roles at the same company for like 4, 5, 6, 7 years, it's the type of companies that aren't so beholden to capital. So like they're run a little bit differently. There's one in particular I'm thinking of where it was like they took on very little capital and they were like, we didn't always like we weren't like the highest paying, like it wasn't like the highest paying sales leadership roles or the highest paying AEs, but we had very like attainable goals. Like we didn't want to try and grow like 40, 50, 60, 70%. It was like we were fine growing 25, 30% a year, but like everybody or most of the people were hitting their goals. Like those are the people that are in their jobs like the longest.
I'm with you. And honestly, after all that I've been through in my career, and I've loved every job that I've ever had, unfortunately, they tend to end in ways that I'm not super happy with, but the nature of this beast that we live in. And I've put a lot of thought into it because, I got into consulting not because I wanted to. I did it mostly because of the pandemic and like we were remote and there were no such thing as remote leadership jobs at the time and whatnot. But now I'm at the point where I'm thinking like, okay, now that remote leadership is like a thing, do I want to get into that? Do I want to go back to an office? Like what do I want to do? And I don't necessarily want to move back to a big city. I'm more of a suburbs guy. I'm getting to that age. I'm past the age where I need to be thinking about marriage and kids and stuff. I'm about to turn 39. I'm saying I'm getting to that age. But, I think to myself, like, would I be comfortable and even happier taking a lower OTE if somehow it meant that I was going to stay there much, much longer? Like, could I stay at the same company for 10 plus years? Would I be happier in that situation, even if it meant like somehow lower OT? And I don't even know that those options exist in the world, but like if there was a scenario like that, would I prefer it? And I actually think I'm at the place where I would say yes, because the money is like, it's great and all, but it also is just sucks to like constantly, feel like you might have one foot out the door because you don't really know what's going to happen in the company in 6 months because everything's always getting shaken up. And like, it would be pretty cool to feel like you belong to something for the long haul.
Not to mention that you might even make more money.
Yeah,
It's
because you don't have the downtime in between.
well, it's like, not even that, but it's just like, at these companies where you have these kind of like growth at all cost mindset and you have these high goals, like sure, they might tell you it's a 500 or 600K OTE, but when you like
Yeah.
dig into it, you're just like, well, shit, you're only making like 50% of your variable or 60% of your variable because you're not hitting
Yeah.
those goals. So
Yeah.
I think there's that, but I totally get that point. So,
Yeah.
on
Well,
the
let's talk about jump. So, yeah, I want to first cover what it is that you're building, and then I want to get into how you're approaching the company.
yeah.
So, let's start with what is jump? What are you building there?
Yeah, so we're building a platform for revenue leaders where we're going to help them optimize their time. And the way that we're starting out is helping them find the most pivotal moments they should pay attention to each week, but then also going to be providing them kind of like rich calendar data so they can historically analyze their time and their
Mm.
team's time. So we're very much leaning into like what we believe to be an underserved data asset, which is like calendars and everything that comes with it, and then putting workflows on top of that data. But really, it's just empowering revenue leaders to help them unlock insights and outcomes from their calendars.
Got it. So this is a tool for the leadership team, right? So that they can have a holistic view of sort of what's on the calendars, what's going on. And I guess I'll play sort of a little role play here, like as imagine I'm taking a demo from you. First of all, I see the need because the tools that exist today are not good. I mean, I've always relied on Google Calendar and or maybe Chili Piper or one of our scheduling tools, but none of them were really built with the scope of like giving visibility into all of these details. So, I mean, we used to fall short. We would try to use Google Calendar and you scale past that. At a certain point, you have too many reps. You just can't. It's not manageable. It's fine when you have a few reps, like works pretty well and stuff. You color code and whatever. You have shared calendars and stuff like that. But you scale past that pretty darn quick.
Past like 8 to 10 people, I feel like you're
Yeah.
scaling back.
Yes, yeah, it gets unmanageable there, especially if people aren't following the process right. Like at Single Platform, we had this very rigid process that we would teach everyone, and we had it in the training guide. Is there were these different types of meetings. So there would be like a demo that was booked. There would be a follow up call. There would be like a closing call, and we would have a different color for each of them. And so that as a manager, we could walk around and be like, "Let me see your schedule." And our brains were just programmed at this point to know what each color stood for. And so you could have a real quick sense of like, what's in there. But we would literally have to walk the floor and say, let me see your schedule. Let me see your schedule. Let me see your schedule. And so that worked well. And so my guess here is you're trying to sort of make that much easier to do and not have to walk the floor to do it and automate it and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we integrate everyone's calendar into one view. So like even if you're a pre and post sale leader, which I was, right, you'll have every extra call that's happening in one view, and then we're pairing it with CRM data. So you can slice it and dice it based on like what you want to see. So for instance, at Botify, again, we used to sell to CMOs. So like I always want to know visibility into like when are we ever talking to a CMO, whether that's on a prospect or a client side. And it's just like trying to understand that information of like when is a CMO hopping on a call. It's just like how are you going to get that unless you're just
Yeah.
doing it manually? You can kind of come in, you'll have full visibility, filter down, and be like, show me all the calls where like CMOs are hopping on, or it's like start of the quarter, start of the year right now. It's like, how do we start accelerating the year? It's like, what are all the calls that are like in stage 2 and stage 3 right now, where like the sales cycle is under 30 days. So like it's still been pretty short, but like things are heating up, and these are the ones that we should be paying attention to as a leadership team over the next like 2 weeks to like get our quarter off to the right start. So it gives you that full visibility, to your point, so you don't have to walk the floor or pull up Google Calendar, but then we add a bunch of workflows on top of it, so you can easily see like what's happening. It gives you like that full visibility, so you feel like you have control of what's happening.
You're making fireworks go off in my head because I'm thinking of all the things that can become possible from this. One of the things that tying back to what we talked about earlier, one of the things I think we should consider for change, at least in the VC model, is how they forecast and how they project sales. And it ties back to what we talked about before, where we're saying like they're always trying to build this headcount model, right, to forecast sales. And I tend to say, like, it doesn't need to be that way. What you can be doing is looking at your average revenue per rep, and we can be working from a capacity standpoint where we're trying to, maximize capacity before we add headcount, and then we get into a rhythm of adding reps as it's needed. So what went off in my head as you're listing that out, and I'm curious if you have plans on this already, will you be able to provide some data so that you can see the capacity that you're actually at, and how much room for more demos like you can take, and then you literally can have the system tell you you're ready to hire someone or you should be preparing for it?
So totally in the sense of like, if you think about just the question of like, how much time is my team spent on like talking to people, right? Like if I have a time, if I have reps, whether they're full cycle or not, just like how much of their time, whether it's 10, 20, 30%, is just spent talking to people, or how many meetings do they have over the past quarter? Like, how are you going to go about like getting that data? And it's not very easy to try and pull that data.
It's estimates.
Yeah, totally. And so that's what we want to be able to do from a historical perspective, is be able to tell you where it's like, all right, you've got 10 reps. On average, they're actually only spending like 30% of their time talking to customers. Like here's where else potentially they're spending their time. So to your point of like capacity planning, it's like, they can talk to more customers. It's like they can take more meetings or whatever it is. So I think that's exactly the direction we want to go, is like to provide that type of historical analysis so you can actually answer those questions. And then to the point of like AI and where you think you can go with that is like all of a sudden, if we have all these like rich historical data sets for customers and you put models on top of that, that's where you can start to think through where it's like starts recommending, where it's like, this is the call you should pay attention to, or this is the time to like hire someone because like you are hitting capacity, et cetera, et cetera. So that's exactly where we want to be going.
Yeah, so that could potentially provide a really strong resource for sales leadership to make these cases to finance, right? Because a lot of what we're doing, like we talked about before, is you're trying to make these cases of like why we shouldn't bring on all these people, or maybe why we do need to hire people. And we don't always have the right data to prove that. And so I always say to people like, when a founder comes to me and says, we're trying to hire 10 more people or whatever, I'm like, what's going on with the reps you have today, right? How busy are they? Are they complaining to you that they have too many demos on their calendar? If no, why are you hiring more AEs?
Totally. And it's like 1840. It's what's the scalable way to figure that out?
Right.
And we've actually thought like maybe finance is a potential user of this in some capacity, so that they have like the data, so they aren't just plugging numbers into a spreadsheet. So
you might have a dashboard that's for their visibility, like that shows the type of stuff that they want to see. Yeah.
Totally.
All right. So let's talk about how you're funding this. So obviously you have some gripes with the traditional VC growth at all cost model. You sat down with your co-founders, you guys came up with a plan. How are you doing it? Are you self-funding it? Are you, raising some angel investments? Are you doing some VC capital, but you're pushing back and telling them like, we're not going to do things the traditional way? Take it away.
Yeah. So it's myself and two co-founders, and I'd say in one of the first conversations I had with one of my now co-founders, Jason's like, him and I were very clear that like we didn't want to go and raise VC capital or like build a company the traditional way. It was just like a pillar that we had like from the beginning. And I think it's because we both are somewhat jaded from what we saw. And it's funny enough, he actually works at a VC firm, and he like fundamentally knows like what has to happen for companies, right? And what VC companies or what VC firms need out of their portfolio companies. And I think our thought process is like, we can build a company a different way. We can be successful as founders to the like, from a financial standpoint, to the point you made, where it's like, yeah, if you sell a business for $100 million, you don't really give anything away. Like you could have the same outcome versus if you sold a $1 billion business. So like, not only could it be good for us as founders, but like also our customers, because it allows us to build the company in the way that we want to build it. And to go back to the point I made a little bit ago, where it's like I've been at companies where we had to like really start juicing up prices because that's how we were going to hit our numbers. Like we aren't going to be constrained by this model that you typically have, or that's our intention is to not be constrained by the model that you have at a VC-backed company where we have to triple, triple, double, double, right? Or like grow 100% each year. We can grow the way that we want to grow. And like that means that we can charge like very affordable price points. And I think that's part of the problem that we've seen with SaaS products is like you have companies, especially now these companies who've raised that like massive, massive valuations in like 2019 through 2022, they have to raise their prices and they have to do stuff. Like that's why everyone's becoming a platform because they have to have a way to like justify these price increases, but like these features are mediocre, they don't provide value. So one of our other pillars is like we want to provide like a very affordable price point that's like almost like somewhat like a no-brainer for these revenue leaders. Like everything I was pitched was 30, 40, 50, 60, 70K for my team, which was like a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it's tough to justify at that time. It's like it's a fundamental pillar for us. And so I didn't answer your question of how we're funding it though. So our intention right now, so we just closed a 870,000 friends and family round. No VCs, no institutions. We knew we needed some capital because like we knew we needed some capital to get going. And so we're like, we're not going to raise from any institutions. It was 70 people. We did it on a roll-up vehicle via AngelList, and like 25 of those people were like revenue leaders to like kind of like build a community. So our intention is let's go raise this round and sprint to profitability. It's like that's what 2025 is for us. Like we just closed literally 2 weeks ago. We kind of did a two-part round where we closed some in the summer and then some in December. But it's like now it's like go time. It's like how do we get to profitability so we don't have to raise capital ever again? And maybe at some point down the road, we're 6 million in revenue, right? And there's like a company we could acquire that could like accelerate us. If we only had $5 million, maybe at that point in time we go and try and raise $5 million from someone, right? But we don't want to have to like where now I think a lot of people will be like, how do we sprint to a true seed round or how do we sprint to a Series A round? It's like our eye's not on that. It's like, how do we build a healthy business? So we see the costs we have in the business today and how do we just fund all of that with revenue? And it's like forcing us to like make certain decisions and certain bets that you probably don't have to make if you just raised a $4 million seed round. So
870K from friends and family. Do you mind sharing ballpark just to give people a sense of like what piece of the pie you have to give up at that stage?
Yeah, about 10%. So
that's what I figured.
Yeah, about 10%. And it was pretty easy for us to come up with that. We basically looked at like, all right, what are our expenses that we think we're going to have? So like from now through the end of 25. And so how much money do we need to be able to fund that with some like very conservative revenue assumptions. And so like that was like a starting place. And then it was like, you think about what the average like is for this type of round. And I think on AngelList, it was like between like $6 to $10 million. And the median was like 9 million. So like, you know, for us to like give away 10% felt like very much in line with like what we needed, what was market. And it wasn't like a ton. So we still like control the business and still own the majority as founders. But enough for our investors to feel like, you know, they were getting something. And yeah, we did, you know, for them, they also got like preferred equity out of the gate because we don't think we're going to raise another round. So we like didn't do a safe, we didn't do a convertible note. So they can like start vesting for QSBS right out of the gate. So there was like certain parts of the round that we thought made it attractive because we weren't going this traditional route. And that was like part of our pitch to these people. The reality was like most of them were just investing in us because they knew us.
Yeah.
But we thought there was like a unique investment profile where it's like the expected return could be potentially higher because even though we're not shooting for a home run here,
Right.
good double like can get someone a really nice return.
So, okay. So you get the 870 in the bank. There's 3 co-founders, yourself as CEO / sales, I imagine.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I mean, I'm doing like all the sales, anything like on that side of the house right now. So
describe what the other 2 are owning.
Yeah, so one's very easy. He's technical co-founder, engineering. And then Jason right now, he's, I'd say, more like product strategy and operations. So he's very much like his background was RevOps. And so part of the reason like him and I clicked out of the gate was I kind of came to him and I was like, hey, I have these ideas and go to market. He was at a VC firm and I knew he was like interested in this. And I also was like, I also think like based on what I want to build, like a RevOps like profile is like a good person to like be a co-founder. He's like, it actually almost is like your chief product officer in a way. And then like we talked, like he didn't say he wanted to like team up, and then like we talked again like 6 weeks later. He's like, by the way, do you mind if I like throw my hat in the ring and we go at this together? And I was like, phenomenal. Like I was like, let's go do it. So his background is RevOps, and so he has a brilliant mind when it comes to like product strategy, especially just like given what we're what we're building. So, but I think he could also do some of the sales and customer side, just given the type of person he is as well.
Yeah, he's going to provide value to basically every area, right? On the product side, on your own sales side of just trying to be efficient and whatnot. So
Yeah.
how are you thinking about sort of the first year and like what types of people you might need to add to the team? Obviously, like it's very different to start out with 870K versus like 2 or 3 million. So how are you prioritizing where you're going to put that money?
Yeah, all engineering and product. So right now we've got, and we've rotated a few contractors on the engineering side, but our mindset right now is pretty much all contractors, no full-time employees. Maybe at some point we would hire one founding engineer or your first engineer, but like we pretty much want to go in the contractor model. And so it's all outsourced contractors from an engineering perspective. And then we have a design contractor as well. So it's
When you
like,
say contractors, are you hiring agencies or these are like independent contractors?
so in a mix of both, where it's like a few of our engineering contractors we found through an agency, but they are essentially there. It's not like a dev shop doing the work. You're
Right,
assigned,
right.
like, here's an engineer that's going to work 40 hours, and they're pretty much part of our team. And so
And
it's
your
like,
CTO is managing the project and overseeing them. Yeah. So
yeah,
that's different than an agency. Yeah.
yeah, totally, exactly. And so it's like, very, very affordable talent that's offshore. We had some people in Argentina. We recently onboarded some people in India and Pakistan. So we're going for like pure affordability. I mean, my CTO has been like great at assessing this type of talent. He's also done it in a previous life. Like he managed these types of people in South America before, which I think gives us a little bit of a leg up from that experience perspective. But it's like I have no intention of ever hiring a go-to-market person until until it's like we are fully like supporting ourselves, and like my time is just like I have no time. Like I literally have no time. Like there's no reason in my mind I would ever hire anyone in go-to-market or product or marketing for like the time being. It's like I think to me, and I was just telling someone this earlier, like success for me is having less than 10 full-time employees and being like a $5 million business. And
Yeah.
it's like how do we get there? We're 5 million profitable. We have less than 10 employees. Like how do we make that happen? And it's like I'm grinding, it's like I'm pretty much BDR and AE for the foreseeable future. Like that is literally my time. And so like that's how we're thinking of building it.
I love it. That's the way to do it, man. I wish you the best of luck and success ahead. Where can people follow you? Or actually, I found you on Twitter, so I've got your Twitter as well, and obviously on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is a great place to follow us. I've in terms of like how I think about go to market these days, it's like the places I'm leaning in is like my community, obviously, the network I've built. Referrals is a huge place that I'm leaning into, and then LinkedIn. So we've started to like ramp up just like our LinkedIn presence. So that's probably the best place to go and follow us. So you can follow me, follow Jump on LinkedIn, and that's going to be the best place to follow along.
And they can check out Jump at jumprevenue.com is the URL. And what's happening there? It's pre-launch, so you have people signing up sort of for teasers and
Yeah.
follow-ups.
So we've got almost 10 beta customers now using the product, and we are just
Okay.
kind of, yeah, so we've got a fully working product. We are just kind of crossing the chasm where we're ready to like we've kind of like squashed a lot of the things that we wanted to squash before we brought on paying customers. So we've just kind of crossed into that territory. So like we're now ready for like our first set of like early customers, paying customers. We just like launched our newsletter or sent our newsletter on Sunday to our community, basically saying that where it's like we're kind of like almost ready for go time. So
Awesome. Any details you want to throw in there on, what when people should sign up or what it costs, anything?
yeah, so actually we in the newsletter we said for the first 15 customers it's like 6K a year.
Okay.
It's just very affordable. And these would be like people again who are running teams of like at least like 10 to 15 people. Like maybe you're managing like a couple managers upwards of like 50 to 100. But I think our like North Star price point is somewhere between like 10 to 20K a year. for like your revenue leadership team outside of like very big companies. So it's like we want something that's like, again, like very affordable. It's because we're not beholden to like the growth numbers that, you would have to traditionally hit to like raise the Series A, Series B, Series C. So
Yeah.
if you're interested, by all means, like ping me on LinkedIn, sign up on our website. Like we're at the place now where it's like we're gonna be bringing people on by the end of January. So
Awesome. Well, I love it. I love the approach. I wish you the best. I think you're going to crush it. I mean, you're filling a need that people, the product is necessary, and I don't know of anything that's scratching the surface on that today.
no, yeah. I mean, there's a few areas like a few products, but it's not their core functionality. So
Are
we're
you
excited.
guys scared of copycat competitors? I mean, that's the one downside. Actually, I'll get your thoughts on that before I let you go. That's the one downside I would say of like going more bootstrapped is like someone could just come in and like behemoth squash you.
Totally.
Are you nervous about that, or you think that you just got the right team and you're going to do it better?
It's a great question. And I think a lot of the times you see with copycats is like they build a cheaper product, and they sell it. That's what I felt at
Yeah.
Botify. And I think for us, like product excellence and like usability is like a huge pillar for us. So I truly believe we're building like an exceptional product, and like people say that when they see it. So I think we're gonna have like an
Mm.
exceptional product. I think we're like focusing on community. So it's like we're trying to like build like a tight knit community. And I think like, if we're at an affordable price, like the biggest risk then is just like does someone like bum rush you and like beat you like in market, right? And they just like
Right.
grab like so much market share. I think it's such a big market. And again, it's like for us to win as a type of company, it's like we get to $5 million and we're profitable. Like we've won in the way that we're building this company. So it's like I think there's enough revenue leaders. Like even if someone raised 50 million bucks and tries to go and like do what we're doing, like we're gonna have a very affordable product and it's gonna be an exceptional product. And like, if we go and capture 300, 500 customers, like we've won. So like it is like that is something that goes through my mind at times. But I think again, like we're not. I think we could get to 100 million in revenue, right? But like that's not the end game for us. Like that doesn't need to be the end game, which I think like that's what you have to do when you're raising like the VC capitals. Like that is your end game. So
Yeah. And there's two sides to that coin, right? On one hand, if you raise less money, it could be maybe easier for someone to catch up and copycat. But on the other hand, you raise less money, someone, a big company who may want to copycat you, well, they could be thinking like, well, maybe we should just try to buy them. They haven't raised a ton of money. Their valuation's not super high. We could go make them all filthy rich and probably be easier than building and competing. So there's sort of both, sort of areas at play there that are to be thought about. At Doctor.com was a bootstrapped company that I was involved in, and they did what you mentioned earlier. Like we raised very little money, a few million along the way, but then they had the opportunity to acquire a competitor who was selling into the enterprise space, and they were very successful around for a long time. So then they raised another like 5 million to just directly buy that competitor. In that case, makes a ton of sense.
totally. Yeah, totally. So,
Yeah.
but I think you're right. There's a lot more buyers for businesses if you're selling for 50, 100, 200 million versus if you're selling for a billion, 5 billion, 10
Because
billion.
it's way easier for them to make that profitable, right?
Totally.
Sometimes I look at some of these acquisitions, and I'm like, how are they going to turn that into a moneymaker? Like, it seems like the winner, they're the founders. Those are the people who won, and the investors. Some of these companies, you see the amount of money that's paid for them, and you're just like, I don't see how this ever becomes profitable because they can't then go flip it and sell it again to someone else.
Not at all. So, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually saw that happen with Single Platform. It was acquired for 100 million by Constant Contact, and then many years later, it was acquired by TripAdvisor for less money.
There you go.
It happens. It happens. But nonetheless, check out jumprevenue.com. Is there a wait list there? Is that what you have today?
No, but we're bringing on 15 customers in January. We've already almost got 10 betas, so we're going to try and bring on at least maybe call it like another 5 to 10 this month, and then go from there.
But people can submit like their info.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Got it. Cool. Well, check it out, folks. We'll have to catch up, maybe in 6 months or whatnot later in the year and see how things are going.
Yeah, I would love that. So I appreciate you having me.
Likewise. Thanks so much for joining me.